Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Excited about this capacity crowd for our very important hearing today, in which we'll be voting on three bills, very different bills, each of which is four bills dealing with three very important challenges for our city: battle against obesity and childhood diabetes, our ongoing efforts to rein in the threat of Legionnaires' disease, and a piece of legislation that's particularly personal to me to allow mothers who have been abused by their obstetricians to remove the name of the abuser from their child's birth certificate. And we'll talk more about these bills in a moment, but I do want to allow folks to vote in case they have to leave, and then I'll cue the sponsors of these two bills, Councilmember Rodriguez and Kalos, for statements. And I do want to acknowledge that in addition to our two bill sponsors, we've also been joined by fellow Health Committee members, Councilmember Inez Barron and Councilmember Keith Powers. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to ask our committee clerk, Billy Martin, to please call the vote.
All items are coupled. Chair Levine.
Vote aye on all.
Barron.
I want to thank the chair for consideration of having us vote first, because I do have to leave. I vote aye on all, and I ask to be added to all of the bills. Thank you.
Well, we thank you for your support and for co-sponsoring the bills. Thank you.
Powers.
I vote aye.
My vote of 3 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions. All items have been adopted by the committee.
And we'll leave the vote open for at least 20 minutes. Now that we have a little bit less pressure on time, I do want to say how excited I am by all of these bills today. And I want to thank Councilman Rodriguez for his partnership on the fight against Legionnaires' disease. And I want to thank Councilmember Kalos for an outstanding piece of legislation that's going to be a major new tool in the battle against childhood obesity and diabetes. I'm excited about these bills and others. Since Councilmember Kalos was here first, I'm going to cue you for a statement, and then we'll go to you, Councilmember Rodriguez. Please.
I want to start by thanking our Health Committee Chair, Mark Levine. You and I have a lot in common. One of the things we do have in common, unfortunately, is Legionnaires. We had a cluster in my district. You also experienced that in your district, and as part of today's package on Legionnaires, I'm proud to have legislation along with yours that is passing through multiple committees that will hopefully mean that no one will ever have to get sick or, God forbid, die again from Legionnaires. But I think the piece that I might be happy about is that kids' meals in New York City are in for a change, from the iconic McDonald's Happy Meal to a kids' meal at your local diner. Water, low-fat milk, and 100% fruit juice will be the default instead of sodas that are high in sugar. We've seen report after report over the past couple of weeks just about how bad soda is and just how much soda kids are drinking. Most recently, enough to fill a bathtub, and no, that is not fiction. That is not Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. That is literally what kids are drinking right now. Obesity is an epidemic in New York City, with more than half of adults are overweight or obese, according to the city's Department of Health. And obesity is starting early in life, with nearly half of all elementary school kids not at a healthy weight, and 1 in 5 kindergarten students entering school already obese. And so I'm just proud to be sponsoring this legislation and having done so for 5 years. And I think the most interesting piece about this is we had testimony previously. It had been, this legislation was widely opposed, but even in recent testimony from McDonald's, it shows that by changing the default beverage, they now have half the meals from McDonald's that are kids' meals now include a healthy beverage. And now it's going to be the normal at 24,000 restaurants throughout our city, and I couldn't be prouder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kalos, for the great bill and for your work on Legionnaires as well. In the Housing and Buildings Committee, we have some good bills moving this week as well. And now I'll cue you, Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. It is so sad to know that months ago, in a short period of time ago, Northern Manhattan have been hit by Legionnaires' disease. And sometimes this reality have to bring all of us to this discussion about how cooling tower need to be inspected and more regulated. So as anyone can write the name of the residential building in any block and find out all the report of violation open, violation corrected. Right now, up to this moment, those information are not public when it comes to cooling tower. So the bill that I had the opportunity to lead as a lead prime and together with the chairman of this committee working, especially because the last case of Legionnaires happening in our area, in his district and border to my district. I think it is important to be able to work in this committee and to know that we are voting this bill, the one that will create a reporting when it comes to all cooling towers in the city of New York. From now on, everyone they will know when the last cooling tower was inspected, what measure was taken to correct any violation. So hopefully this will allow us to collect all the information to be sure that those individuals or agencies that own those cooling towers, those buildings with cooling tower, they should know that we are watching on them and that we expect that all violations are corrected so that we don't have to live the experience that unfortunately took the life away of so many great New Yorkers on North Manhattan because of the Legionnaires disease.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Rodriguez, for this bill and for your work on the topic. I do want to say a few words about a piece of legislation that I am pleased to be introducing today related to just the incredibly painful problem, women who have been abused by their obstetrician, and the name of that abuser then enshrined in perpetuity on the birth certificate of their child. This is not just a hypothetical. This is a very painful real-world case for dozens of women who were abused by a doctor who has since been convicted, whose name appears on the birth certificates of these children. The leader of this movement, one of the most inspiring people I've had the chance to work with, Marissa Hochstetter, who appeared before this committee in a very emotionally impactful hearing earlier this year, she has led this charge, surmounting many obstacles. To work with her has been a real honor, and I'm just thrilled that New York City is now going to give Marissa Hochstetter and the dozens of other women, potentially more, who have been victimized this way, to give them the right to have a little bit of pain alleviated from their lives by removing the abuser's name for their birth certificate. And I'm pleased that we have we're voting on that bill as well, 1308-A. I would like to cue fellow Health Committee member Dr. Matthew Eugene, who has joined us. We still have the vote open, and so we'll ask Mr. Martin to please allow Dr. Eugene to vote.
Continuation roll call, Committee on Health. All items are coupled. Councilmember Eugene.
First of all, thank you, Mr. Chair. And with that, I vote aye. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. This concludes the formal part of our hearing, but we will ask that the vote remain open for 10 minutes because we are expecting Councilmember Ampry Samuel to join us. Thank you all very much.
Good morning. This meeting of the Committee on the Justice System is called to order. We are here this morning with Councilmember Alan Maisel and Councilmember Andy Cohen, and we are considering resolution number 641 by the Public Advocate, Jumaane Williams. The Resolution 641 calls on the State Division of Criminal Justice Services, the Office of Court Administration, and New York City's district attorneys to expunge records of all city misdemeanor marijuana convictions, as we anticipate that the state legislature will legalize recreational marijuana this year. Taking care of those with previous misdemeanor convictions will be a crucial step in moving past an era of overcriminalization and over-policing of primarily communities of color. A conviction, even one for a misdemeanor, can wreak havoc on a person's life and derail their future. I am so pleased that some of our district attorneys are already taking steps on their own. For example, the district attorneys in both Brooklyn and Manhattan have dismissed open warrants for marijuana possession, and in Brooklyn, DA Eric Gonzalez has gone even further, establishing a program to vacate prior convictions that could reach as many as 20,000 eligible Brooklynites if they're able to get the word out to everyone who can apply. So all of you who are here today, and particularly my colleague from Brooklyn, and those of you who might be watching at home, please let people in Brooklyn know that there is an opportunity to have their prior convictions vacated, and they should reach out to the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. With that, I would ask the clerk to call the roll and vote on Resolution 641, and for what it's worth, the chair recommends a yes vote.
William Martin, Committee Clerk, roll call vote, Committee on the Justice System. Chair Landsman.
Yes.
Cohen.
Permission to explain my vote?
Yes, sir.
Just very briefly, the chair knows I was a law secretary in the court system for many years, and my judge would, because he was acting supreme, would have to do criminal arraignments periodically. And I cannot tell you how formative it was, the impact it made on me, watching person after person coming up and being released ACD or whatever, or just for time served, spending 24 hours through the system for smoking a joint, like on their curb, sitting in a parked car. It was really, it felt like a colossal waste of time, but also the impact that it had on people's lives. So I think this is a good day. I hope the state legislature takes our advice. I'm sure they're waiting for our resolution, but I proudly vote aye.
Mizell. By a vote of 3 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions, resolution has been adopted by the committee.
Thank you all very much, and this meeting is adjourned.
All right, good morning, good morning. I am Councilmember Donovan Richards from the 31st District in Queens and Chair of the Public Safety Committee. And we are here today to vote on 5 resolutions calling on the state legislature and the United States Congress finally do what should have been done long ago. And it seems like they need the reminder. For a moment, it looked like these resolutions would have been meaningless by now because Albany seemed poised to finally end one of the most unnecessary and fruitless and costly endeavors in our state's history. Over the last several decades, marijuana criminalization has contributed to a deep sense of mistrust of the NYPD among the very communities that are in the direst need of a police department they can trust. It has put people in jail, cost them their jobs, their housing, even their children, and all that for no benefit to public health or public safety. Despite all of the reasons to legalize, it seems that there has been a delay in getting state legislation passed in connection with the budget, and we are urging our state legislators to take up the issue again in the spring. And we need them to do this now because we in this city are tired of paying the price for a legislative choice that we cannot change despite a willingness of the council and the mayor to do so. When the Criminal Justice Reform Act passed a few years ago, we were able to divert tens of thousands of arrests out of criminal court. We couldn't do that with marijuana because it is controlled by state law. But we can't tolerate a situation in which we have no say over how the NYPD enforces the rules around marijuana any longer. Even now, while they are arresting far fewer people, the racial disparities in arrests and summonses are the same. We need to have control over our own police force, and even if marijuana is legalized, how they enforce the rules. We can't have a scenario where black people in minority communities get fined for the same behavior that goes unpunished in white communities. That's why I'm sponsoring proposed Resolution 742-A, which would give localities like New York City the authority to determine whether and how we regulate public consumption of marijuana. We at the council have been willing to take action when the police department needs to change, and I can't say the same about Albany. So not only do we need them to legalize marijuana, we need our state legislature and governor to give us the power to change the rules on public consumption if the police department can't figure out how to enforce them fairly for everyone in the city. We are also voting on Resolution 75-A, sponsored by Councilmember Levin, which calls on the state to pass the Marijuana Regulation and Taxation Act, which would not only legalize marijuana, but would encourage the kind of investment and business development opportunities in the communities most harmed by the war on drugs, an essential component of starting a legalized marijuana industry here in New York. We are also voting on Resolution 296, sponsored by Public Advocate Jamani Williams, which will call on the New York City Housing Authority to add marijuana misdemeanors to the list of overlooked offenses so they can no longer be the sole basis for a person to lose their public housing. We are also voting on Resolution 743, sponsored by Councilmember Miller, which calls on the U.S. Congress to pass the Marijuana Justice Act of 2017, which would legalize marijuana at the federal level. Finally, we are voting on Resolution 745, sponsored by Councilmember Moya, which would call on the state to reclassify THC products from a controlled substance to the equivalent of flower marijuana. All righty, we will now open the vote.
Matthew DiStefano, Committee Clerk, Committee on Public Safety. Roll call on the aforementioned resolutions. Chair Richards.
I vote aye.
Gibson.
I vote aye.
Cohen.
Aye.
Deutsch.
Abstain on 296 and no on 75, 742, 743, and 745.
Landsman.
Aye.
Rodriguez.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Let's call it what it is. Marijuana has been legal for wealthy New Yorker. Marijuana has been legal for tourists. When was the last time that we heard someone from the 65 million tourists that came here last year being arrested? When have you heard that in a dog club that they have the VIP section in Midtown, shares in those areas, someone being arrested because using weed? Someone being arrested because they've been using weed in the rooftop in New York City. So I believe that it is important to make marijuana legal for everyone. However, by voting on legalizing, on calling to pass law at the state level that will allow the city to legalize the recreational marijuana, doesn't mean that we are telling people go out and go and buy marijuana, as we are not telling people to go out and go and buy beers or go and buy cigarettes. So I believe that it is important also that we understand that we are trying to do here is to bring fairness, to be sure that what has been a reality for wealthy New Yorkers and visitors is the same thing, the same standard for all New Yorkers. But at the same time, I also hope that as we're going to be legalizing marijuana, that the revenue of marijuana will not be used for anything that is going to be more than reinvesting that money in the poor neighborhood. That money should be used to fight addiction or opium or any drug addiction so that we can bring, investment to the underserved community. So with that, I vote aye, by understanding that we are not encouraging people, especially in the underserved community. The message is not to say people go out and go and consume marijuana, but it's more bringing fairness to everyone. With that, I vote aye.
Brandon.
Aye.
Vallone.
Permission to explain my vote?
Permission granted.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not there on all of these yet. I'm not there on a general overall approval on New York State and the federal. I think there's much work that needs to be done, especially on the impact with driving. But I am supporting those that specifically target areas that need to be looked at, such as NYCHA, such as reclassification, and such as giving New York City, as it always should have, the authority. So with that, I'm saying no on 75A and 743, yes on 296, yes on 742, and yes on 745. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Landsman.
Aye.
The vote on today's public safety items, Resolution 75A, 7 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative, 0 abstentions. 296, 8 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, 1 abstention. 742A, 8 in the affirmative, 1 negative, no abstentions. 743, 7 in the affirmative, 2 in the negative, no abstentions. 745, 8 in the affirmative, 1 negative, no abstentions.
Thank you. I'm going to read a statement by my colleague who unfortunately had an emergency and couldn't make it, Councilmember Miller, on Resolution 743. Today, this body will vote on one of two resolutions I am proudly sponsoring that call attention to the lasting damage inflicted on communities of color, primarily in the form of harsh prison sentences due to the racist war on drugs, and urges governments to undertake steps to correct the moral and social errors of criminalizing marijuana in particular. Resolution 743 calls on the federal government to enact the Marijuana Justice Act of 2017, sponsored by New Jersey Senate Senator Cory Booker, which would end the federal prohibition of marijuana and similar changes in state law, automatically expunge federal marijuana use and possession crimes, and enable those incarcerated in federal prison to petition courts for resentencing. The NYPD recently testified that marijuana misdemeanor and violation arrests have fallen by 71%. Yet, despite the more lenient approach adopted by the department last fall, a recent analysis of the stats reflected that the racially biased enforcement of cannabis has persisted over that period, while those for whites have actually fallen. The facts are clear. Whether arrest or summonses, the enforcement of marijuana prohibition perpetuates racial discrimination towards Americans and New Yorkers of color and must end. Our communities of color have especially suffered under these oppressive drug laws, but not all communities of color are alike. My diverse Southeast Queens district has one of the highest shares of owner-occupied homes in New York City and the largest contingent of civil service workers. Yet it led the city in marijuana summonses issued by the NYPD for over a decade. The legacy of over-policing these communities has served to deprive future generations of opportunities for higher education, employment, and home ownership. The process of making them whole again begins with automatically expunging, not sealing, criminal records for petty marijuana offenses, and continues with the cannabis equity for our aggrieved communities of color. I thank the Speaker, Chair Richards, and my colleagues with the BLAC, as well as the Progressive Caucus for supporting this resolution. I also like to thank Committee Counsel Daniel Addis and analyst Keishorn Denny for their work in drafting this legislation, as well as my Legislative Director Brandon Clark and Special Advisor Joseph Goldblum for their work towards its advancement. We at the Council are taking a clear stand on this issue, and I implore both the Legislature and the Governor to heed our call as they continue to chart the course for the eventual legalization of marijuana in New York State. Councilmember Miller on the record. All righty. And of course, he votes aye, although he's not here. With that being said, this hearing is now closed.
All right, good morning. Welcome to the Committee on Land Use. I am Councilmember Rafael Salamanca. I chair this committee. Today we'll be voting on projects referred out of our zoning and planning subcommittees. From our zoning subcommittee, we'll be voting to approve LUs 359, an application for Tesabul LLC for a revocable consent for the renewal of an unenclosed sidewalk cafe located at 250 Park Avenue South in Manhattan in Councilmember Rivera's district. The applicant has agreed to reduce the size of the cafe and to other qualities of life commitments, and consequently, Councilmember Rivera is in support. We will also be filing LUs 376, an application for a tax exemption pursuant to Article 11 of the Private Housing Finance Law. This application has been withdrawn by HPD from the package of related applications for the Blondell Commons rezoning. From our planning subcommittees, we will be voting to approve LUs 347, Cooper Square, MHA Phase 1 for property in districts of Councilmembers Chin and Rivera in Manhattan. This property includes 21 limited equity co-op buildings totaling 327 units and 22 commercial spaces, which sit on a community land trust. The Cooper Square Mutual Housing Association is renovating these buildings in a multi-phase project through HPD's Greenhouse Preservation Program. The renovations will include capital improvements as well as energy efficiency, water conservation upgrades. To facilitate this renovation work, HPD is seeking the termination of the prior tax exemption and a new 40-year tax exemption pursuant to Article 11 of the Private Housing Finance Law. Council members Chin and Rivera are supportive of this project. We will vote to approve two projects which we heard together, LUs 357 for 332 Eldert Street in Councilmember Espinal's district, and LU 358 for 63 Stockholm Streets in Councilmember Reynoso's district, both in Brooklyn. For both projects, HPD is seeking UDOT project approval. For LUs 358, disposition approval is also sought. These approvals will facilitate the development of a new building with 4 units of affordable housing at 332 Eldert Street and the development of a new building with 20 units of affordable housing at 63 Stockholm Street. Both projects, which will be developed on a vacant city-owned land, will serve a range of incomes from 30 to 80% of the AMI and include a 10% set aside for the formerly homeless. Councilmember Reynoso and Espinal are supportive of these projects. Finally, we will vote to approve LUs 366 for property at 167 West 133rd Street in Councilmember Perkins' district in Manhattan. HPD is seeking determination of the prior tax exemption for this site and a new 40-year tax exemption pursuant to Article 11 of the Private Housing Finance Law. The building, a 15-unit low-income co-op, was carved out of the most recent round of third-party transfer programs. The 40-year tax exemption will be retroactive for 8 years. The current HDFC will retain ownership for this building, and Councilmember Perkins is in support of this application. Are there any questions or remarks from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, I will call a vote in accordance with recommendations of the local council members and the subcommittees to approve LUs 347, 357, 358, 359, and 366, and to file LUs 376, which was withdrawn. Will the clerk please call the roll?
William Martin, Committee Clerk. Roll call vote, Committee on Land Use. Chair Salamanca.
Aye, I know.
Landsman.
Aye.
Gibson.
I vote aye.
Constantinidis.
Aye.
Deutsch.
Aye.
King. Koo. Reynoso.
Permission to explain my vote?
Councilmember Reynoso to explain his vote.
I just want to note that at the hearing,
in the subcommittee, we talked about having 15% set aside for supportive housing. It was at 10%, and I want to get it to 15. We're having discussions with HPD to secure that. I just want to make sure that I follow the model of Chair Salamanca in the Bronx in getting 15% in. It's not officially on paper here, but we are discussing with HPD, and we're fighting hard to get to that 15%. So I just wanted to make sure I acknowledge that, and I vote aye.
Thank you, Councilmember Reynoso.
Kalos.
Aye.
Richards. Torres.
I vote aye.
Gordenchik.
Aye.
Adams.
I vote aye.
Diaz.
Aye.
Moya.
Aye.
Rivera.
Permission to explain my vote?
Councilmember Rivera to explain her vote.
Just want to thank everyone for their support. I know that Councilmember Kalos had read my testimony into the record for these buildings, which are part of a community land trust, which you all know I'm a big supporter of, and hope that we can expand support from this council. These are affordable home ownership opportunities with truly affordable maintenance fees, and I just want to thank you all for your support and proudly vote aye.
King. By a vote of 15 in the affirmative, 0 in the negative, and no abstentions, all items have been adopted by the committee.
We will leave the roll open for 10 minutes.
Councilmember Richards.
I vote aye.